thanks everyone for coming to day 3 of PlanTech week. On Monday we discussed citizen engagement. Yesterday we were discussing design, and today we're going to be discussing the development process. And thank you particularly, given it's so nice and warm outside, and you've come to this windowless basement. So I think you guys all deserve a big congratulations on that stuff. So just for those of you that don't know, PlanTech Week is a week-long exploration of how digital and new technology can change or improve the ways that we plan cities. Tomorrow we're launching an exhibition upstairs, a future planning exhibition, which will be up for a few months. And hopefully all of you guys should come along and see it. Do tweet #PlanTech, which you'll be able to see the conversations that were happening yesterday and Monday as well. But to jump straight into it, I'll just quickly introduce our panel. So we've got a great panel today. We've got Anthony Slumbers, who's been developing online products since 1995. I didn't even 1995 online products, and now consults on the impact of tech and on the real estate. We've got Michelle Hanna, who's Associate Director at CAST, the property consultancy. Hugh Lacey, Director of Pioneer Consultants, who do viability work for the private sector. And we've got Johnny Britton, one of the founders of Landon Site. So we thought we'd kick off today with Anthony Slumbers, who's going to talk about AI, big tech, and the way it's impacting on the real estate industry. Over to you, Anthony.
Okay, thank you. You can all hear me, hopefully. Okay, I'm going to charge through a bit, because what I'm looking to do is talk about what I think are 10 signals that indicate there's going to be fundamental change throughout the real estate industry. So, straight into it. Signal number 1, in January, the Chinese e-commerce company Alibaba bought InTime. Now, InTime are the owner of 29 department stores and 17 shopping centers. Why would an e-commerce company buy a shopping center? Because in China, 80% of all e-commerce, one way or another, goes through Alibaba services. So they have an extraordinary insight into both the supply and the demand side of the retail industry. What they also have is an awful lot of retailers in the centers sell their goods through Alibaba as well. So they have this incredible amount of data. And if you talk to Alibaba, they say, we're not an e-commerce company, we're a data company. And it's quite possible that because they have all this algorithmically generated data, they can probably operate physical real estate better than any real estate company. So the takeaway from that is the real estate industry may not be the right people to actually own real estate, or the real estate industry needs to dramatically improve its understanding and utilization of data. Signal number 2. Last month, IBM announced that they had entered into an agreement with WeWork to sublet an entire building in New York, with WeWork doing the design and managing the space for them. What's the takeaway from that? If a company the scale of IBM can find it preferable to use a service provider like WeWork as their landlord, rather than a traditional real estate company, then the traditional company actually falls several notches down the value tree. So there's a big question mark, I think, looming over the whole industry is, do you have product market fit anymore? Signal number 3, Google's parent company, Alphabet, has applied, believe it or not, to develop 12 acres of downtown Toronto, not for their own occupation, but to utilize what they've been learning through their Sidewalks Lab subsidiary. And they talk about, we want to build a city from the internet up. So the takeaway from that is the real estate industry needs to consider who it is actually competing with. If Google can build a city, then what is so special about the real estate industry? Maybe they can be, in software terms, deprecated. If you look at the tech industry, it's highly likely to move into real estate. First off, you have the rise of modular construction, prefabrication, which I think we're going to hear a lot of later, robotic construction, use of drones to manage construction sites, and everything is playing to the software industry's strengths. You've also got the rise of BIM, building information modeling, and as an amazing video I saw a couple of days ago, a thing called AI BIM, where you have BIM modeling, but it's not an architect or an engineer who models it. It's an algorithm, which is quite extraordinary. So if the entire design and build, fit out and operational sides of construction and real estate can be digitized, then the industry can be full prey to, as Mark Andreessen famously said, software is eating the world. In this world, the construction industry becomes a low-level commodity player, and traditional developers become, if not obsolete, then a lot less godlike than they think they are today. Signal number 4, 45% of the US population lives within 20 miles of an Amazon fulfillment center. 45% of the US population lives within 20 miles of an Amazon fulfillment center. And that's the most prosperous, highest spending 45% of the population. Now, take away from that, as the third most valuable company in the world, Amazon has amazing financial muscle, operational brilliance, and data ownership to predictively supply all those stores with the right product at the right time. Same day or even often next 2-hour delivery is getting ever closer. Now, physical retailers, particularly in the UK, have taken refuge in click and collect. I think click and collect are a big driver. Let's do that. That'd drive people into our stores. But what happens when same day or 1 or 2 hour delivery becomes the norm? Are you really going to schlep down to the store? It's a big problem. What you're going to get is only the best or the cheapest physical retail is going to survive. The UK situation is less pronounced than the US, which is massively overapplied with physical retail, and it's predicted that 25 to 30% of all shopping centres miles in the US are actually on death row. That's a huge amount. Think of it, a third of the shopping centre market might well be dead in a couple of years. So anyone following the rise of e-commerce would not be at all surprised that Into, who are the shopping centre real estate investment trust, is falling into the FTSE 250, while Segro, who provide office space, have actually just joined the FTSE 100. Signal number 5, computer vision, aka image recognition, now errors at a rate of less than 5%. Errors at a rate of less than 5%, which is better than humans. And the same applies to text recognition. Images and video can now be searched and analyzed at scale and in real time on everything from a smartphone to a supercomputer. So the world around us is becoming recognizable and analyzable by the camera in your pocket. So images can be reconstructed from very fuzzy fragments, objects can be recognized at vast distances, and 200,000 plus people can be facially recognized all at once in real time. Voice search, similarly, you've got the rise of voice search, now accounts for 20% of all searches on Android, and Siri responds to over 2 billion commands a week. So the takeaway from that is, as Mary Meeker said in her State of the Internet report last week, a lot of the future of search is going to be about pictures instead of keywords. So residential search will move to be by selecting a series of images that present themselves in accordance with your previous selection, having understood what that says about your preferences. Commercial space design will incorporate the use of images to better understand and more quickly what it is the client is looking for. The same will apply to finding new offices, so the way agents market space will become far more visual. There's a huge amount of stuff, if you like, that goes into the fitting out of the built environment. So going forward, much of this will be chosen utilizing image search. In terms of the advances in text recognition, increasingly we are going to see that we use our voices instead of keyboards as the interface to our computing devices. So talking to Alexa, that sort of thing, everyone's doing it now rather than using a keyboard. So expect to see a lot more customer service being offered via chatbots, as well as lead nurturing, organizing bookings, and setting up meetings. Property searching via chatbots is already available, and there's a company in America that's done a test between a chatbot which uses image suggestions and an agent, and they got they had a customer, and they offered them, tried to find out how quickly the right properties to suggest to them. And the chatbot, the algorithmic chatbot, did it by images and seeing what they picked and then taking like that. And it always outperformed the agent. So alongside speech recognition, natural language processing has improved to the extent that we can expect it to be de rigueur in lease abstraction, contract analysis, and the likes within a few years. If you're in the business of abstracting data out of contracts or whatever, best to look for a new job pretty damn quickly. So, signal number 6, Google's DeepMind subsidiary is now the undisputed world #1 in the game of Go. a combination of new processing chips, which are called tensor processing units, deep learning and reinforcement learning has given them mastery over a game that has more options than there are in the observable universe. So the takeaway from this is AI is going to become a very big thing, much faster and probably more pervasively than even most experts thought. We reckon that perhaps 60% of the tasks that people do within the real estate sector with a noted bias towards finance and asset management, where the money is, are sitting plumb within the crosshairs of what AI is good at. The large incumbents have both the most to lose and the best chance of co-opting the machines for competitive advantage because they have proprietary data. If we find a major firm suffers in the next 5 years, it's going to be entirely the fault of management rather than technology. Signal number 7, from every quarter there are signals galore that the world of work is changing. Google in their Workplace 2020 report said flexible working will be the defining characteristic of the workplace in 2018. There are an ever-growing number of freelancers through choice or through necessity. The millennial generation is fast becoming a major component of the workforce. You've got 48% of people in London work for companies that employ less than 50 people. There's only 12% of people work for companies that employ between 50 and 250 employees, and 40% work for larger companies. What Google found in their survey is the bigger the company, the more flexible working, the higher percentage of their employees they expected to be working flexibly. That's going to all change the composition of space required by the market and the characteristics of their space. Signal number 8, WeWork, founded just 7 years ago, is valued at $18 billion. The takeaway from this is very simple. The real estate business is no longer about real estate. Signal number 9, over $1 billion was invested into autonomous vehicles startups last year. Countless billions more were invested by incumbents like Ford, Volvo, Tesla, and BMW. The takeaway from this, self-driving cars will happen. The only question is when. In controlled environments like dedicated motorway lanes or perhaps specific areas of the city, this might happen over the next few years, but a wider rollout is still probably 5, maybe 10 years away. But it is coming, so you have to plan for it, because it will have consequences. There won't be much need for parking, there won't be much need for garages, there won't be much need for petrol stations, vehicle centres, village pubs will revive and longer commutes will become acceptable. Signal number 10, improbable, the people behind the Spatial OS, which allows you to create virtual worlds of unprecedented scale and complexity, last month raised, wait for it, $502 million. Take away from that, as their product develops, we will be able to accurately simulate ever more complicated environments and the behavior of ever larger numbers of people. And cities are, of course, hugely complicated environments with millions of actors. So what can we learn from these 10 signals? Have to repeat the William Gibson, the future is here, it's just not widely distributed. We have a pretty good idea of the forces and trends that will determine how our cities develop. And with the likes of improbable, we'll find increasingly good ways of simulating them. As we move to an increasingly digital world, we as humans need to become increasingly human and concentrate on those skills that set us apart from the machines. That means we need to concentrate on spaces that really help us leverage these skills. I believe the constant stressing for the need to live-work balance is the wrong way to look at things. Life is becoming much more of a blend of live and work. If we no longer have to go to an office to work or a shop to shop, then where we do our work or where we live can become much more flexible, and how we spend our 16 hours a day awake perhaps a lot less regimented. So we need to plan for this new world. You never know, it actually might come true.
Good stuff. Thank you, Anthony. Michelle, are you worried about losing your job to AI?
No. I use that. Yeah. Okay. So rather than talk about too far into the future, what I'm going to talk to you about is the here and now and what we're seeing with our clients, who are predominantly private developers, in how they're trying to drive forward modernization and innovation within delivering mostly residential housing. So I think the biggest question we have from our clients, probably a good couple of years ago now, is why should we be worried about modernization in construction? Well, for those of you that are not aware, last year our CEO at CAST wrote a paper called The Farmer Review, which was entitled Modernise or Die. And what that paper did was signal 10 failures in the construction industry that are the reason why we're not delivering housing at the speed that we need to be delivering to meet the demand. What I want to do is to take you through a couple of those failures. I won't go through all 10 of them. But the first one, low productivity. So if you look at this graph here, what you'll see is the bottom line in construction shows it's essentially flat in terms of how productivity works within the industry. This is not something that is unique to the UK and is actually a construction industry problem across the globe. The fact of the matter is, when we design things to be delivered in terms of housing, we don't design them well first time. We actually do a lot of rework as we're going through the construction program, which means we end up with a lot longer program. So we have a real lack of well-designed early briefs for our contractors when we pass them over to them. And we do end up at the end of a project doing a lot of things retrospectively, which causes a lot of delays and means there's a lot more labour, man hours spent on site than what was intended at the original start of a project. Second thing is poor predictability. So although we may define a programme at the start of a project, actually as we're going through it, there is an expectation that it's going to actually be delayed, and clients who are our developers accept that that's just the case, so they actually just don't push hard enough the contractors to actually deliver on time. This lack of certainty is kind of one of the biggest drivers in which we're not actually going to be able to deliver the houses we need to deliver within the time we need to meet the demand. One of the other big things around predictability is we build contingencies into our construction budgets. Now, a contingency is there for an unforeseen event. It's for something outside of a client's control. But actually what they're used for is failures in a project. So they're used to actually subsidise costs that we did get right the first time, but we've had to do rework. So we've got new costs introduced that we're effectively representing of a failure. The third one, and probably the most important one, is workforce training in the industry. So in construction, we are facing skill shortages. We don't have enough capacity within our workforce to actually deliver the houses we need. Training in the industry is seen as a loss leader. A lot of the smaller house builders, not your large volume house builders that do a lot of strategic land sites out in the regions, the smaller ones, kind of see they're just left holding the baby when it comes to training, because what they'll do is they'll employ an apprentice who will spend maybe 2-3 years with them, and as soon as they're trained and skilled, they will then go on somewhere else where they're getting more money. So the small developer or house builder then loses out, so they don't see an incentive for them to actually deliver training within their workforce. On the other side, the graph shows you that the amount of money that is spent on research and development and construction is all the way at the bottom of the graph in terms of comparison to other industries. We don't have enough investment in innovation. We just kind of tick over and do things the same way we've always done it. So we always build traditionally. We always use brick and block work to build houses. And we don't really think outside of the box because there's no real incentive for developers or contractors to actually do that. One of the big reasons why there is no incentive is that construction is very much a cyclical industry. So we go through the peaks and troughs that a recession brings. So contractors get the good times when there's a boom, but when there's a recession, they are on a lot less profit levels than you would expect for the industry. And actually profit in contracting is actually really low compared to any other industry within the UK. So why do we need to modernise then? So we've got a target number of homes to be delivered. Whether or not that is 1 million homes or whatever the number is going to be, it's a huge greater number than what we're actually delivering. And we've got to deliver it by 2020, according to government forecasts. And we are nowhere near delivering that, and we're already actually behind. So we need to look at ways to address how we can address our skill shortage, which is one of the issues that's actually restricting us from building the number of homes we need. We also have capacity issues within our house building industry where House builders can only deliver so much. So we need to look at ways in which we can accelerate capacity or create additional capacity. Construction industry, as most people are aware, is not an attractive industry. It's not something you go to school and think, I want to be a bricklayer when I grow up. So it's not something where we're gaining a lot of young people when it goes to young people looking to move to trade apprenticeships or things like that. That tends to be people who are told they're not good enough to go to university, so you go do a trade. So it's not I could go to university, but I choose to do a trade. That doesn't happen. And move on to what is probably for most of construction one of the biggest problems. So if you take everything of those failures that we've identified in the review, actually, if we solve them all, what we tend to still see is we've still got growing concerns around quality. So if you look at what's been going on in the press recently, you'll see there's a lot of articles, not just in trade press, but in national press, about the fact that the quality of housing in the UK is not to the standard that it should be. So we need to think of ways of actually building that actually make sure quality is spot on. So with our clients, we're looking at ways in how we can change the delivery model for construction. One of the big areas we've been looking at over the past couple of years is pre-manufacturing. There's a lot of association that pre-manufacturing just means prefabrication, which we've all known since post the Second World War has actually been done already to deliver a lot of council housing estates. Pre-manufacturing is not prefabrication. Pre-manufacturing is about changing the way we design and construct. It's about doing a lot more upfront work, about thinking things early on in the process and not just carrying away with building before we've got a properly designed building. What we think pre-manufacturing will do, and we're actually seeing it in real projects that are running at the moment, is it's going to give us greater quality, greater certainty around cost and the programme, which is benefiting for all. And this change, it will be led by industry disruptors, innovators and new entrants. It's not predominantly going to be done by those other existing players in the market, but those existing players are going to have to be pushed, or else they'll be pushed out if they don't do it. So pre-manufacturing, what does it actually look like? So here you can see that actually where in normal construction we'll have a core go up, and then the cladding will go up around it. Actually, pre-manufacturing takes the whole building up at a floor-by-floor level at a time. So actually, when you've already finished your core, you've put your apartment modules in, so if you're doing full apartments, then you bring the cladding up with the building. Actually, you've got a building that's complete within probably around 6 months before a traditional project would complete. So other techniques that are being used are things like brick slips. So whereas in traditional construction, we will have a bricklayer lay bricks, actually putting brick slips onto a panel within a factory are being implemented in a lot more houses and a lot more blocks of flats, which is actually a much quicker process and better quality because it's delivered in a more controlled environment. So we are seeing a lot of new entrants into the market. So if you look at this list here, there's probably only a few of those that are actually existing players that have been in the market for quite some time. People like Legal & General have come into the market as a new entrant. People like Swan Housing Association, who have been delivering houses for some time, but have now gone and built a factory to actually deliver. So we're seeing so many different players come in, which is going to push those existing players to have to up their game. What we're also seeing as well, which is quite supportive, is actually a shift in the mindset of local and central government into understanding that off-site manufacturing could provide better quality homes. I've just got a couple of case studies, but I'm getting pushed for time, so I'll skip over this one, but talk about, this is probably one of the biggest ones within the UK. So in Greenwich Creekside, Essential Living, who is a private developer, but plans to operate their assets long term. They've got 2 buildings complete now. This is their 3rd. And effectively, what they've done is they've put the core of the building up on site, but they're now craning in modules to put the apartments up. Now, they're 4 floors up at the moment. So this image is a little bit behind the time. There are 4 floors up at the moment, and now they're starting to clad the building. So what's going to happen is the internals of the building is going to be completely finished before the cladding's actually finished, which is something that we don't do in residential housing. It's something we've tested in student accommodation, but it's something we don't generally apply to true residential. Others, as I said, Swan Housing has built a factory. They've built a factory out in Basildon, and they are going to deliver CLT modules from that factory to their Landon Site out in Basildon. And then probably one of the biggest disruptors that we have is Legal & General, who have a 55,000 square metre factory out in Leeds, and they are going to deliver a lot of build-to-rent residential housing using that factory. Legal & General is probably the great example of somebody who's put their money where their mouth is, and they've not gone and waited for someone else to test the concept. They're going out and spending the money because they can in testing the concept. So I think what I'll leave you with is, although I said earlier, change needs to be led by industry disruptors, the fact is it is being led by them already. There are so many players out there that are out there trying to do new things and create new techniques so that we can deliver housing a lot quicker.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you. So pre-manufacturing will help us deal with the housing crisis then.
Right, thank you. You can see that we need to modernise because I've just got a piece of paper and a pen. And I'm going to talk about viability and how it principally applies to planning viability. It also is relevant for commercial viability. 2 things a little bit different, but I won't go into detail about how they're different. But viability is driven by data. It's just that the practices and the practitioners sort of pretend that they don't think it is. They hide behind experience and judgment as being something which is not driven by data. And a sort of little example and a sort of stereotypic valuer might say, well, there might be some science behind setting floor area, comparable sales in an area when they're looking at the value of a property to plug into a viability consideration. They'll say, we know what the floor area is, we can calculate that, that's fine, I understand that. We know what the comparables are in the area, we know how many number of bedrooms, we know whether it's a new build or a refurb. But where the art comes in is when I become a valuer and nobody can understand this data side of things because I'm a valuer and it's all about my view and of how the scheme will come forward and how that applies to the value of the project. And they might say a good example would be, how do you add value for a view? How do you adjust value for a great kitchen as opposed to a very poor kitchen? And they'll say those are things which are driven by myself and my judgment. In a development scenario, the science versus the art would be, the development area. To an extent, the cost of the build might fall into the scientific part because it can be measured a little bit more clearly. But the developer might say an area where data can never really get involved in might be the balance between overall project risk and the level of developer return. But I think what the sector is missing out, when I mean sector, I mean viability consultants, I'd include myself within that, and viability practitioners acting for local authorities, is they're sort of pretending that that sector is driven by experience and judgment, which has no relationship to data. But actually, when you look at all of those decisions, they are all data related. It's just that we're sort of kidding ourselves that we're making judgments in our mind, but actually we're calling it personal view, and actually it's under the banner of experience. We think of experience as things which drive our decision making on viability, but actually all those experiences are pieces of data. They sit in my head and I make judgments about whether risk should be adjusted to reflect the certain attributes of a project and whether developer return should respond to that risk. They're just pieces of data. Now, if you could extract them from my head and put them in a model, then in theory you could replicate all the things that are going on in my head, probably some of the things you wouldn't want to, but there we are. So the challenge that we were sort of looking at a few months ago is, can you model the viability exercise and sort of start thinking about how you might automate that And what are the barriers to doing that? Now, the principal barrier is that planning is the thing that drives or controls the delivery of the development process, and that is a balance between commercial return and social benefit. So those are two sort of difficult bedfellows insofar as social benefit is driven by a whole range of factors, and commercial return, you might say, is driven by individuals with a desire for their own benefit. So they don't fit together naturally. And a good example is land value. And anyone that knows a bit about project viability and all the problems that we're having in terms of how we progress this through the planning system is land value is a real problem area. And this is a classic battle between commercial return and social benefit. And this will be one area that will be a huge challenge for a viability model to start gathering together some of those data inputs that I've just sort of alluded to, categorizing them, doing some sort of AI type modeling of them, and to come out with a conclusion. Land value is the one thing, and because you're probably dealing with individuals. Now, I deal with some landowners, and quite frankly, some of them are barking mad. Now, this is probably going out on things, so I won't not say where these are and who they are, but they are individuals, and they will behave in the way that sometimes appears incredibly unpredictable. When you look back at how they behaved, you might say, actually, they probably did follow a pattern, but at the time, they feel very unpredictable. So it's actually very difficult to make that plug-in into a model and fit land value. What we do need is guidance. And I think the reason why we're struggling to get a viability type model that can gather together all these disparate bits of data that compile the cost and value side of a project, analyze that data and come out with a conclusion about, as I've just alluded, how the social benefit should match with the developer's return in order to get a successful outcome for everyone. Lost my train of thought now. Where was I going? Guidance. The guidance is really important because it's very hard to build a model when the guidance at the moment is all over the place. We've got national guidance, NPPF, we've got a range of local guidance, and that's contained in the London Plan. Some of the boroughs have got their own plan guidance in terms of how you undertake a viability assessment. Practitioners have got their own approaches. The RICS have got something that tries to stitch it all together. So it will be very, very difficult to draw and build a model today that fit all of those situations and kept everyone happy. The important thing about the guidance is that it's about transforming the system, and we need to ensure that the market has time to adjust. Now, there has been some talk recently about nationalisation of land value and a new land tax, and this is the way to deliver all that social benefit, is to force the landowners to pay for it. We've got to be very, very careful about that. Landowners provide the raw materials of development, and they need to be brought forward in this process to help us all through it. Now, I just want to touch on one area that's a little bit sort of mischievous, and that's what viability is causing us some problems in terms of people are using it to set their negotiation position. Now, this is understandable because, again, planning balance, it's a negotiation, and developers are being forced to set their position and use it to use viability to underpin that position. So you're having all of those knowledge and those feel-based adjustments into the model, which are then used to produce an outcome, which is then submitted to the council to say, this is what we think the social benefit of the site can be. The council then get their own assessor who does a number of little adjustments that are probably hidden from view, and they come up with a different conclusion. So that sets the difference between the two positions. And the negotiation through the planning process is all about trying to narrow those gaps. Now, the big problem that we're having is the gaps are very wide because the local authorities, to be perfectly frank, are as bad at this as the developers. So for every developer that's pretending they can't deliver very much, there's a local authority that will say that you can deliver more than is realistic. So we've got a very wide gap, and we've got practitioners in the middle that are sort of hiding away from a data-driven solution. And I think that there probably is a way, if we're all a little bit more open about it. Actually, what viability is a collection of data. It's understanding what that data does, how it links together, and you could then start to say, well, that process can be modified, it can be shortened, it can be made more clear, and it can give people a much better understanding of what the social benefit that the site can deliver, and how the planning balance should be settled. So I think there is the sector will have to wake up very, very quickly, otherwise it will get caught out. And there's far too many old school views about development viability that say there is no way that a machine could possibly do what I do. I'm a valuer, don't you know? And actually, when you break that down, that role that they're undertaking, and you break down all the components of those models, and you say, what are you actually doing with those inputs and assumptions, and how are you getting your conclusion? I would suggest that a large number of them are actually very, very simple calculations. It's about getting access to that data in order to make those calculations produced. So I think that's pretty much me done. Could talk for hours on this, sorry.
Thank you very much, Hugh. So machine learning can stop land speculation then? That's kind of what I take from that. Johnny, have you figured out how to use machine learning to stop land speculation?
I don't know what anyone's doing with our data on our platform that uses machine learning, potentially for land speculation. No, we don't. Okay, just as an introduction, for those of you who don't know Landon Site, it is a technology company that aims to solve the housing crisis by giving technology to small and middle-sized property developers so they can build more. I'm one of the co-founders, I'm the CEO of this project. What the software does is let you look at any piece of land and understand it as a development opportunity. So what are the risks, opportunities, and the investment decision about that piece of land? And then take action on that by contacting and organizing the workflow of doing a deal on that piece of land. We are quite a fast-growing company and looking to employ a lot of people at the minute. So if you've got interest in what we're doing, please say hello at the end. Sorry. Okay, so where is the kind of state of the art in machine learning and AI and technology right now? And I mean, what it really does is it enables you to get disparate bits of information and make sense of it in a very scalable way. You don't program in, if this says this, then this says this. You let it learn what the information means, and you give it training data sets, and you feedback how it performs. And you need to do this at a massive scale. So planning application data is a perfect kind of data set. You need to aggregate it, you need to standardize it, then you need to interpret it. It's that interpretation piece that machine learning can be really beneficial. So we do it just on that interpretation of 10 million different planning applications, so we can display that information in a very accurate way. And the edge cases, because there's no standards in the planning system. You know, we all talk about that. We need more standards, and yes, we wouldn't have to do all this tech if we just had better standards, but this enables us to scale up around the UK access to the inside the planning applications. So other companies are doing very interesting things with pulling together masses of data sets about what indicators of the market. So if you look at Shoreditch, where it was 10, 15 years ago, what are the data sets that people could get access to that showed the historical trend before it became a real emerging area of the city? And you can do that on a larger level or a smaller level. And using that kind of inference to say, well, where then is the next Shoreditch, and where should we be looking at for the longer term investments? There's a company called Placemake that are doing that, and Realise are also ones to watch in that area. So, yeah, the result of this is that rather than having massive capital outlay on land banks, you can have a more real-time and flexible look at the markets, the options that are out there, being able to respond in real time, being able to react to the market because this data updates on a daily basis. And that's the kind of real enabler for the small businesses. They don't need to spend up front. They can build relationships and move at the right time. They have a virtual land bank. So the art and the risk of development right now is about the developer understanding the potential of a site. You know, their art is to know roughly, on a ballpark, what you can put on a piece of land. And that's the kind of easy bit, if you like. How you then control that site is another piece of art. How you go and stroke the cats of the owner, and you have lots of cups of tea and build relationships, ultimately to build relationships and get the best deals. This is all off-market land. This is not land on the market, which has all the value taken out of it. You can't buy land on the market and get a really good deal anymore. So you have to find your own deals. Then how do you can value engineer the site in one of a few different ways. You can by controlling that site, you can have access to the complete costs from the outset and get it through planning, optimize that planning application to get the most out of the site. Or you can control the construction costs, and with the use of prefabricated, no, is that the right one? Pre-manufactured, that allows you a lot more predictability in the cost, and that cost will shrink over time. So that's a really exciting area. And then it's what you do with the space after it's used, and the move to PRS, co-living, co-working are really interesting areas. And I call those areas where big data meets small data. So having access to the information about how people are behaving in your building, and then that feeding back to the wider market and the view of the market is where AI is really going to make an impact in the future. So knowing how people, what the occupancy rates of a building are, what lease terms are, what the yield of a building is, what the average demographic age of the residents are, what are the management costs, and the Internet of Things that are creating efficiencies in the management costs of buildings, and how management companies are able to respond to things is going to create huge efficiencies. And that data, when you look at the market data, the population movements, the policy, new precedents going in, demographics changing in an area, that interplay between these two things is where it's huge opportunities to interpret that data. And it really needs a professional to interpret that data. But when you're looking at millions of different buildings plugged into these systems, it's impossible to do at scale. And so this is where the artificial intelligence with these massive training data sets will be able to provide these insights into where the markets are going and how you should be making investment decisions, and what is the right building for the right place. But that raises huge questions. If you think of this model I'm talking about, like a Bloomberg for property, this kind of stock market of land and property, it's not the same. You can't just have premium access subscriptions for the corporates. This affects real people, and it's their real lives, it's their behavior that you're tracking. So who actually owns that data, and who has access to that data? They're some of the big questions, and therefore I think the question of who owns the data in the AI-driven world is going to be the big one to answer right now. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Johnny. So I think if we'll have questions answered, if we can get our panel to join us here on the floor, and we'll have some questions. I think really good discussions, quite contrasting. I've got very, very different questions to each of you, but I think if we kick off with, anyone here have questions you'd like to ask? Yeah, or can I kick off? I've got the mic, so I'm gonna kick off. I think, Anthony, if we could start off with you. Co-working, co-living, space as a service isn't just a niche market, isn't it just a bit of a fad? I mean, there's not really that much going on at scale that can address some of these bigger issues in housing, etc.
I think that's That actually is the standard thought process of most people in the commercial real estate industry. They think, so just loads of stupid hippies in WeWork and all that sort of stuff. But actually, when you start looking at it, the way companies are changing to the way they operate, everyone. There's a sort of starting point that they want to reduce costs, so they want to use less space. But effectively, because of technology, we're all now completely untethered from our space. So the way people are going to use space is going to change. And if you look at the composition of the market, as I said, 48% of people in London work for companies with less than 50 people, which probably means space is up to 6,000 square feet. Well, the way to operate a good modern office is using a thing called activity-based working, where you have lots of different environments and you have the right environment for the type of work you're going to do. Sort of collaborative work, meeting works, concentration works. Now, most people with 5,000 square feet cannot do that in their space. So they're really a perfect target for co-working or various types of flexible. So I wouldn't be surprised within a few years, certainly within 5 years, I wouldn't be surprised if it was 30-40% of the whole market.
Michelle, I mean, do you see that working with property developers? Are they actually interested in this kind of stuff? Is there?
So the co-living thing, we are seeing a lot more developers look to deliver co-living buildings. I'm not sure how wide that market actually is and whether or not it's probably more niche market. The co-working thing, though, it's quite an interesting one because I work in a lot of build-to-rent schemes, which is not really a known kind of name to give a product in the UK, but it's effectively a single landlord managing maybe 100, 200 units, which are all rented apartments. And one of the biggest things that we're looking to include in those buildings is working space on the ground floor, on the idea that most young professionals, even moving into those early 40s, do work from home a lot and do rent. So why not give them a space within their building that they can escape their apartment and work from home? So we're seeing it happen a lot.
Mm-hmm. Good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, just from our own example, we were 5 people before Christmas and we'll be 17 people soon. How do we plan to get a lease in a building if we don't know how many people will be in a year's time? So the co-working is absolutely here to stay. It solves a crucial part of companies getting sorted. And the community aspects of that are what we look for, and expectations of kind of knowledge workers in the 21st century is that they're part of something. In terms of the co-working, so I think it's pretty niche. People think of it as kind of the big ones, like the collective, who've kind of cornered the market or trying to attack the market for young professionals. But then if you think about the kind of elderly or people with disabilities and the services that they all need that are quite similar, then you can provide more targeted and branded and nice living environments specifically for kind of wider groups of people.
Okay, good stuff. So maybe it's here to stay. Any questions from the floor? Yeah, at the back there.
As a question probably for Johnny, I think, you mentioned placeflex.io. I was interested in the rise of AI, the impact it's going to have on the development sector, because you use Shoreditch as an example, where obviously Shoreditch has now changed significantly from what it was 15, 20 years ago. But that change has been initiated by the creative sector and artists moving into a place and making it hip and trendy, and obviously the developers kind of following behind that. With AI, do we risk losing that opportunity for that kind of indigenous rawness to be created by people like artists and creatives, because we can forecast what the next Shoreditch is without needing the next Shoreditch to be created, if that makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So can we predict gentrification, or can you predict gentrification, Johnny?
I think lots of people are trying to predict gentrification. That will be kind of one of the core goals of their platforms, because on the back of it is where the investment opportunities are. Whether that's the right thing to do, I don't know. That's the way that the data will lead us, and there'll be new questions arise from that. I would have thought it would be pretty difficult where we are and the amount of data we've got access to now to predict the areas that are going to be gentrified rather than the best opportunities that are coming from those that are going through gentrification. But over time, I'm sure it'll head that way.
Good stuff. Does anyone else want to add anything to predict gentrification? No? Okay, we've got a few questions here on the other side, Matt. If you can say who the question's for as well.
I don't know exactly who is it for, maybe Anthony or maybe Hugh, I don't know. The question is, don't you think that now moving forward, especially for employment more generally and employment land, because we've always measured land as blocks and square meters, and also we monitor success through rentals, which is not necessarily, that is a lot, it takes a lot longer than actually the reality of a changing work environment. And should we not change the measures more on jobs and people? Because that is what gives the density of jobs and people is what we want in planning. That's the goal of planning, not square meters of a warehouse with 3 jobs, or the famous Donald man. So should we not use technology to move the measurables into something different than space?
Great question. I think, Anthony, I'm really interested in seeing what you're, you mean. With all this new way of working and living, do we need new ways of measuring?
Oh, you absolutely do need new ways of measuring, to be fair to developers, it is a big problem, because essentially, the whole market is moving from selling a product to delivering a service. It's going from rent collector to service provider. So there's huge sort of cultural problems or challenges in moving that way. But fundamentally, if you start having your buildings used as a service, the building actually starts to become valuable as a business rather than a bond. And all developers typically would just love someone to come straight in, take a 15-year lease. Thank you, Dad, that's it. It's simple. But if that's not going to happen, and buildings are starting to be valued based on the income they can generate through providing services, the whole mindset completely changes. Not least of all, you have to change your mindset about who your customer is. So typically in an office building, on a longer lease side, your customer is just the person who pays the rent. You really don't care who's in the building, what they're doing at all. But if you're selling space as a service, the user experience of the space you provide becomes your brand, and your brand becomes your value. And yes, absolutely, we're going to need completely different models of how we value space, because it is space as a service. Value that service.
Hugh,
it's tricky, but it has to come, because places are going to fill up like that. No one's going to sign long leases. One interesting thing, you look at any big company moving now, they typically lob 25–30% off what they take. So big company taking 100,000 square feet, guarantee you if it's moving today, it would say, I want 70,000 square feet. And that might not be because they have less people, it's just they're all working in a different way. So it's all moving to flexibility, and you go in lots of different types of spaces.
Huge. I mean, do you think it's realistic that we bring in other measures, for example, productivity of a building, the health and well-being of its inhabitants, as part of the valuation process?
Possibly. I think it's sort of, to me, the other problem comes from the planning system being generally quite unresponsive and generally taking a long time to go from the point at which a building in its current use sort of reaches a point where the landowner thinks, actually, I quite fancy something else, and developers equally say, I quite fancy something else on that site, and the process starts off with a new application, and that gets dealt with, and eventually get consent, and then a building which you choose how you're going to occupy it. That process is extremely long and actually very rigid and unnecessarily structured, perhaps. So if that system was much more responsive, then you might allow for those sorts of changes to come in. But from my sort of viability head, I'd be going, oh crikey. If someone said, I really don't know how I'm going to occupy this building, I think I might do it on a sort of, to value the building as a sort of ongoing serviced asset as part of some sort of split up and occupied by a range of different people. I can just imagine the council going, how on earth are we going to assess that? That gives us all sorts of concerns, and generally in viability terms, all sorts of concerns equals lots of delays as everyone tries to work out how on earth they get over this problem. So the planning system, I think, is really rigid and unflexible. So actually, you probably can't bring those sorts of things in and meaningfully have the planning system respond to it in the current format.
Yet. We had another question up there. Just.
Hi, Rupert Barker, the head of future-proofing at GVA. Do you think, I think there's we're approaching dangerous territory almost in terms of this, we're going back to this point of gentrification and data leading decisions. Do you think we're losing the sort of human aspect almost, or losing sight of the importance of the human aspect in real estate and actually enabling gentrification rather than trying to predict it?
Who's the question for particularly? I think I'm interested in Johnny's response to that particularly.
Any comment?
No, I think that is the fear, because people go, AI, it's going to eat all the jobs, and software's eating the world, and we'll all just be working for that AI. But I think it's just I see it as just an efficiency and optimizing and getting more feedback from the space. Look, I can't really answer that question perfectly, but it's the way I see it is that you're gathering data about the people in the buildings. You're also gathering data from the planning system, the population movements, and you're marrying up a lot more things together in order to have access to more levers in the planning system. So I don't think it's about, I think it's actually aiming to help people. I don't think it's trying to work just for the drivers of investment decisions, although they're the people who are most going to invest the most money into it. But the data collection, if you answer some of the questions I outlined at the end of who can access it, they'll be useful in many different circumstances. It's just that it's driven by the private sector currently, and so that's kind of the way that people talk around it.
Michelle?
Just to add to that, so I think Anthony referred to a YouTube video that he watched about AI BIM, which I watched the same video, and what was quite interesting is it did refer to the fact is basically we're just going to replace everything with running with data, and the fact is we're not. We're always going to need some sort of human interaction in anything we do, so we're only going to take it with data to a certain point. One of the great things that's going to come from data, I believe, is having been involved in a lot of rental buildings over the past 5 years, one of the biggest things we struggle with is how do people want to live? Gathering data to be able to inform decision making on how we design and provide buildings is going to be hugely beneficial for construction as an industry. So I see kind of like the positive in kind of collecting that data and understanding how people use space is going to be so much more beneficial than where we are at the moment, where we're designing things. We don't know if people actually want to live in them.
Mm-hmm. So I guess very much along the lines of Cedric Price, technology is the answer, but what is the question? So just to finish off, we've got kind of one last minute, I think, from each of our panel. If there was one piece of data that you'd like to have access to, that we could collect in a new way, what would it be?
I'll answer that first.
Okay.
So data on how we operate buildings in terms of what it costs to operate them, we have no idea.
Okay. Hugh?
Okay. I'll do the next one then. Straight on for that. I would like data on how everyone in that building uses that building. So you end up knowing exactly how the building physically performs and then how all the humans use it. Then you can do some cool stuff.
Johnny?
Okay, mine's a bit more boring than that. I'd like to see everybody's rental price, or then you could do some good things with that data.
And you?
Mine's unashamedly viability based, and I just say some sort of value judgment. And when I mean value, it's residential sale prices, because the land registry information is what it is. There's so many gaps in it that every time you look at it and think that it's going to be helpful to this, again, narrowing this discussion where everyone's interested in, narrowing the discussion so that the human interaction can say, is this a good outcome for the community and for the developer, about narrowing gaps. And with Land Registry, I can pull some figures off Land Registry, someone else can pull some figures off Land Registry, we can have a big gap. I think there needs to be more information around floor sizes, location of those units, and how they're orientated, and there could be much more data gathering around Land Registry, which would make it much more useful.
Good stuff, guys. Thank you all very much. Thank you all for coming. A round of applause for our panel. Thank you. And do feel free to continue the discussion. Hashtag PlanTech. These guys are mostly on Twitter. Yeah, let's keep talking. Thank you.